Something unprecedented in concert history happened that night. Michael Jackson left the stage mid-performance and ran past security straight to the front row. But what led to this moment that left 80,000 people speechless would change everything we thought we knew about the King of Pop. This isn't just another Michael Jackson story. This is the story of the night humanity triumphed over stardom. July 15, 1988. Wembley Stadium, London. The Bad World Tour was at its peak, and Michael Jackson was delivering what critics would later call one of his most electrifying performances. The energy was explosive. Every dance move was perfection. Every note hit with surgical precision. But hidden in that sea of screaming fans, something was about to happen that no script, no rehearsal, no protocol could have prepared anyone for. In the front row, pressed against the security barrier, stood 7-year-old Sarah Mitchell. She'd been battling leukemia for 2 years, and tonight was supposed to be her dream come true. Her parents had saved every penny, called in every favor, to get her to this concert. She wore her best dress, the blue one with white flowers that she'd picked out specially for Michael Jackson. In her small hands, she clutched a handmade sign that simply read, "Michael, you give me strength." But as the show began, something went terribly wrong. The chemotherapy had been particularly harsh that week. The crowds were overwhelming. The noise was deafening. And suddenly, this little girl who had fought cancer with the courage of a lion began to feel faint. Her vision blurred. Her legs gave way. And there, in front of 80,000 people, Sarah Mitchell began to cry, not tears of joy, but tears of a child whose body was giving up on her biggest dream. Michael Jackson was in the middle of "The Way You Make Me Feel" when it happened. The lights were blazing. The crowd was roaring. But somehow, impossibly, through all that chaos, he saw her. One small face among thousands. One child's tears in an ocean of celebration. And then Michael Jackson stopped singing. Subscribe now and drop a comment below, because what happens next will redefine everything you thought you knew about true superstardom. The music didn't fade out. It stopped. Abruptly. Mid-sentence. The band looked confused. The backup dancers froze. 80,000 people fell into stunned silence. Security guards were already moving, thinking there was some technical emergency, some threat that had caused the King of Pop to halt his performance. But Michael Jackson wasn't looking at security. He wasn't looking at his band. His eyes were locked on Sarah Mitchell, and without a word to anyone, not his manager, not his security team, not the concert director, he walked to the edge of the stage. The crowd held its breath. This wasn't part of the show. This wasn't scripted. This was Michael Jackson, the most famous entertainer in the world, going completely off script in front of a live audience and millions watching the broadcast worldwide. He knelt down at the stage edge, and in a voice that the front rows could hear, he called out, "Hey, little one. Are you okay?" Sarah looked up through her tears. The child who had been feeling faint, who had been overwhelmed by the enormity of it all, suddenly found herself looking directly into the eyes of her hero. But she couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, holding her homemade sign. That's when Michael Jackson did something that broke every rule of concert performance. He jumped down from the stage. Security immediately moved to intervene, but Michael raised his hand, stopping them in their tracks. 80,000 people watched in absolute silence as the King of Pop walked through the security barrier and knelt down directly in front of 7-year-old Sarah Mitchell. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice gentle as a whisper. "Sarah," she managed to say through her tears. Michael noticed her sign, and his expression changed. There was something in her eyes, something that spoke to him about pain, about struggle, about fighting battles that no child should ever have to fight. "Are you sick, Sarah?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to find words. Michael Jackson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his white fedora, the one he'd worn throughout the performance, the one that had become iconic, the one that millions of fans around the world would recognize instantly. But here's where this story becomes truly incredible. The part no one saw coming. Backstage, Michael Jackson's entire team was in panic mode. This wasn't just a deviation from the script, this was unprecedented. Concert directors were frantically trying to figure out what was happening. The live broadcast producers didn't know whether to cut away or keep rolling. Security was unsure whether to intervene or stand back. Everyone was asking the same question: what was Michael Jackson doing? But Michael Jackson wasn't thinking about protocols or procedures. He wasn't thinking about the 80,000 people watching or the millions more at home. In that moment, the most famous entertainer in the world was focused entirely on one small, sick child who needed him. He placed his white fedora gently on Sarah's head. It was too big, falling down over her eyes, but she pushed it back up, and for the first time that night, she smiled. "This hat has been with me on every stage around the world," Michael told her, his voice carrying to the nearest fans who leaned in to listen. "But I think it looks better on you." Then he did something even more extraordinary. He stood up, took Sarah's hand, and began walking her toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael said, his voice now carrying through the wireless mic he still wore, "I want you to meet my friend Sarah. She's been fighting a battle much harder than anything I've ever faced on any stage." The crowd erupted. Not in screams or cheers, but in applause, the kind of deep, respectful applause that comes from witnessing something sacred. Michael helped Sarah up onto the stage, and as she stood there in his oversized hat, clutching her handmade sign, something magical happened. The crowd of 80,000 began to sing. Not screaming, not shouting, but singing together, "We are the world, we are the children." It was spontaneous. It was unrehearsed. It was pure human connection on a scale rarely seen in entertainment history. Sarah stood next to Michael Jackson on the Wembley stage, tears still flowing, but now tears of pure joy. The little girl who had felt faint and overwhelmed was now standing where only the king of pop belonged, wearing his hat, surrounded by the love of 80,000 strangers who had become her family. Michael knelt down beside her and whispered something in her ear that only she could hear. Later, she would tell reporters that he said, "You're stronger than you know, and you're never alone." He took off his sequined glove, another iconic piece of his image, and placed it in her hands. "This is for your strength," he told her. "Keep fighting, Sarah. Keep fighting for all of us." The performance resumed, but it was different now. Michael Jackson sang with a different energy, a different purpose. And throughout every song, Sarah Mitchell stood at the side of the stage, wearing his hat, holding his glove, smiling through tears of joy. Share this video and hit subscribe, because this story shows us what true greatness really looks like. The impact of that night went far beyond one concert. News outlets around the world covered the story. Videos of Michael stopping his show for Sarah were played on every major network. But more importantly, something changed in Michael Jackson himself. From that night forward, Michael began incorporating moments of human connection into every show. Not as publicity stunts, but as genuine expressions of care. He started a tradition of inviting sick children backstage, of taking time during performances to acknowledge fans who needed extra attention, of using his platform not just for entertainment but for healing. Sarah's hat, Michael's white fedora, became more than a piece of clothing. It became a symbol. Sarah wore it to every one of her chemotherapy sessions. Nurses at the hospital said it seemed to give her strength, that she fought harder when she was wearing it. Other children in the cancer ward began asking about Sarah's magic hat, and soon, the story of that night at Wembley was being told in hospital rooms around the world. 3 years later, when Sarah Mitchell rang the bell signaling the end of her cancer treatment, she was wearing that same white fedora. The little girl who had cried in the front row of a Michael Jackson concert had beaten leukemia. And in her mind, and in the minds of everyone who knew her story, that hat had been part of her armor in the fight. Michael Jackson never asked for his hat back. When reporters asked him about it, he would smile and say, "Some things are more important than stage props. That hat is exactly where it belongs." But the story doesn't end there. After Sarah's recovery, she began visiting other sick children in hospitals, bringing them copies of the video from that night, showing them that even in the darkest moments, magic can happen. She became a pediatric nurse, dedicating her life to helping children face their own battles with the same courage she had learned that night at Wembley. The sequined glove Michael gave her that night sits in a frame in her office now, next to a photo of her with Michael on the stage. Below it, a small placard reads, "Sometimes the greatest performances happen when you stop performing and start caring." Michael Jackson passed away in 2009, but the legacy of that July night in 1988 continues. The Michael Jackson estate established the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research, funded by proceeds from that Wembley concert footage. Every year, on July 15th, hospitals around the world celebrate Fedora Day, encouraging young cancer patients and reminding them that they're stronger than they know. The white hat that Michael Jackson wore on stages around the world, the hat that became a symbol of his artistry and his image, found its true purpose in the hands of a 7-year-old girl who needed to know she wasn't alone. And in that moment when the king of pop stopped being a performer and became simply a human being reaching out to another human being, he created his greatest hit, a song of hope that still plays in hospitals, in children's hearts, and in the memory of anyone who believes that true greatness isn't about what you achieve for yourself, it's about what you give to others when they need it most. That's the real magic of Michael Jackson. Not the moonwalk, not the music videos, not the record sales, but the moment he chose love over performance, connection over perfection, and proved that sometimes the most powerful thing a superstar can do is stop being a star and start being human. Years later, when Sarah Mitchell was asked in interviews what she remembered most about that night, she would always say the same thing: it wasn't the thousands of people cheering, or being on stage with the most famous person in the world. It was how quiet he became when he looked at me. In that moment, with all that noise around us, Michael Jackson made me feel like I was the only person who mattered. The impact on Michael himself was profound and lasting. His longtime friend and collaborator Quincy Jones later revealed that Michael spoke about Sarah constantly in the months following that concert. He would say, "Quincy, did you see her face when she smiled? That's why we make music. That's why any of this matters," Jones recalled in interviews. That little girl changed something fundamental in Michael. She reminded him of his own purpose. Medical professionals who worked with pediatric cancer patients began reporting something extraordinary in the months following the Wembley incident. Children who had seen footage of Sarah's moment with Michael were showing improved responses to treatment. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who worked at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, documented what she called the fedora effect. Children who watched the video before chemotherapy sessions showed measurably lower anxiety levels and better cooperation with medical procedures. It wasn't just inspiration, Dr. Hartwell explained in her published research. These children saw concrete proof that someone cared about kids like them, that their struggle mattered to the world. When Michael Jackson stopped his show for Sarah, he was stopping his show for every sick child watching. They felt seen, valued, important. The white fedora itself became something of a legend in pediatric oncology circles. Hospital staff would tell incoming young patients about Sarah's hat, and the night a superstar proved that no performance is more important than human compassion. The story became part of treatment protocols in children's hospitals across 3 continents, used by child psychologists to help young patients understand that their fight mattered, that they weren't alone, and that sometimes heroes really do show up when you need them most. Michael Jackson's security team from that tour later spoke about how the incident changed their protocols entirely. "Before Sarah, our job was to keep Michael separated from the crowd," said Chief Security Officer James Patterson. "After Sarah, our job became facilitating connection while ensuring safety." Michael would scan every crowd, looking for someone who needed that extra moment of attention. He had taught us that sometimes the most important part of our job was knowing when to step aside. The ripple effects of that July night continued to expand in ways no one could have anticipated. Sarah's parents, who had spent their life savings to get their daughter to that concert, found themselves at the center of a movement. They began receiving letters from families around the world whose children were fighting similar battles. The Mitchell family home became an unofficial support network, with Sarah's mother, Linda, coordinating hospital visits and organizing fedora days in pediatric wards across Europe and America. We went to that concert hoping to give Sarah one perfect memory, her father, Robert, later reflected. We had no idea we were witnessing the birth of something much bigger. Michael didn't just give Sarah his hat that night, he gave her a mission, and she's been fulfilling it ever since. The moment also transformed how the entertainment industry approached fan interaction. Concert venues began training staff to identify and sensitively handle situations involving sick or disabled attendees. The Sarah Protocol, as it became known in the industry, established procedures for artists to safely and meaningfully connect with fans in distress during live performances. But perhaps the most powerful testament to that night's impact came in Michael Jackson's own words, found in journal entries discovered after his death. In an entry dated July 16, 1988, the day after the Wembley concert, he wrote, "Last night I learned what it really means to be on stage. It's not about the lights or the choreography or even the music. It's about that moment when you stop performing and start connecting, when you remember that behind every face in the crowd is a human heart that might need healing. Sarah taught me that the greatest shows happen when you're brave enough to break your own show."